Okay, so we can start. And as you heard, my name is Maciej Wyrodek, and I'm here with the rules of engagement question to ask before you start automating. And I want to take one thing already out of the way. There are no answers here. This is not presentation for the answer. Each question would be worth of the presentation of each own with all of the answers. Because if I would have to give you an answer right now, we could make the drinking game, and because at every question the answer would be it depends. For each of you the context will be different. I'm here to help you understand the stuff, but before we go there, and you can ask me question at any time. We will be checking some at the end, but I'm also looking at the chat, and if something worth mentioning at given moment will come, I will be answering it. We are live. Let's use this environment to have discussion during the presentation. And so how is our track going? First, we'll start with few words about me, so you understand that I know what I'm talking about. Then we will look into why the questions are important. I will try to show you some examples where the question didn't happen and to what it led. Then I will be discussing the issues that the question can help us. And after that, we will discuss some tips for looking at the subject. And at the end, we will go into the question. You may think that, wait, this is 40 minutes presentation called the questions, and the questions will be just a small part of it. Yes. Unfortunately, we need to be at the common ground to be able to discuss it. So that's why we are going this way. And of course, as I said, write your questions in the chat because I will have one for you too for the warm-up. And before that, who am I? I am basically seeker of knowledge. We are all knowledge workers, and I have unsatisfied thirst for knowledge. This is the reason why I created the IT Morning, because this is opportunity for me to read more, to see more, and to think about the stuff. And I started as tester. I grew from that into the mentor, trainer. Now I'm leader, and I'm also expert and consultant. I've seen many projects, some working directly, some as outside expert helping them. And I've seen many ways of failure and many ways to the success. That's why I think I know enough to be able to discuss the subject. And for starters, let's warm up you. I have question for you. I know we have delays, so I will be going forward and then we will going back to see your answers. But I want you to think and write to me, what are your issues with automating tests? No matter, are you developer writing unit test? Are you developer writing integration or even UI? Or are you tester? Even if you are manual tester or human tester that is not doing automation, I think you had some experience with this, so you can share what are your pain points. That will be very interesting to hear. And give me a second, I'm going to take a sip of the beer. And why is that important? Because before we move forward with the answering the questions, we need to understand the problem. Basically, knowledge is half of the battle, and understanding the problem is giving that us opportunity to resolve the problem. If we don't have the answer to the problem, we won't be able to do that. We won't be able to move forward, or we'll be moving in completely wrong direction. So understanding is the starting point. Basically, without this, there's no point of doing anything. We may have great solution, but if we have a good solution to wrong problem, we have no solution. And waiting for you, I will give you example of 3 cases where automation failed. Well, actually 2 cases when the automation failed and one when it could be better than it was. And to just show you how deep the problem was and how rudimentary the question was, we'll be using 5 whys. This is not training on the how whys. Will be doing some shortcut hits. It's much more a tool to show you how we came to the conclusion to see the errors than actually a tool for the going forward. And there's already one interesting thing said. Testing leads to failure and failure leads to understanding. Yeah, Maciej, Michalski, I agree with you. Understanding comes from the failure. I think in the Star Wars Last Jedi, Yoda said, the failure, the best teacher is. And let's start with a few examples of the things that failed in automation for me. This is one of my most painful failures because that was the first time when I actually was going, as you know, the expert that was going to save the project, and I failed to save the automation in that project. Basically, that was the system designed for calculating budget. That was huge system with lots of dependencies. And when I don't know where to start in that kind of retrospective, I'm using usually the very simple statement for the start. Automation didn't bring expected value. And usually at this point, we can ask ourselves why or what that even means. This leads us so to understanding. In this case, we spent 3 months writing POC for the automation in that project, but we didn't have any usable test. During that time, lots of tests were written, but they were going obsolete quite quickly due to different reasons. Some were have problems with data, some were problems with the stability, a lot of issues. But the more we looked, the more we have one issue. The issue that was also a problem for the normal testing, not using automation. We had no ability to prepare test data. And in each case, no matter if you are a manual tester or the automation, you had to create data via UI. You had to actually manually search on the UI for looking for the position that had data that you could use. There was no search index. Using database for that was also problematic. So it was taking ages. And you can imagine how it was affecting the stability of the test. Why it was like that? Basically, the system was completely dependent on the third-party system to support it with the data, and that was the big issue. And we couldn't control that data. You may think, why we weren't able to mock this? Basically, system was old and not documented. We understood the some flows of the logic of the business, but we didn't have enough understanding of how the structure was done. Our company was the third that was developing or maintaining the system, and the first one did a very poor job. The logic was everywhere. There was logic in database, there was logic in API layer, there was logic in the UI. We had at some point in past performance tests done, and the performance tests were creating data straight in database. The effect was of lots of corrupted data that from that point was the pain for the future. We hadn't enough understanding how to actually create data in the system to move forward. And there was one issue, but that was the key blocker. And here we can see thing that killed the automation project. After 3 months, I knew that either we have to rewrite the way we are generating data or create in the system, or there is no point in automation. The customer didn't see point because he believed that soon he will be replaced the system with the new one. He's saying that for the 5 years. And on my point was the biggest issue was I never, when looking at the project, planning the project for the automation, I never asked the right question about the test data, how we're going to manage it, how it's come to the system. If I would ask these questions at the start and I would look how it actually is, I would probably have much sooner come to the conclusion this is wasted effort. And before we going to the next one, there is another interesting thing said. Automated tests are too heavy to update that nobody does it, and there is a lot of false positive. Or who is responsible for the test outcomes? Alexander, you are saying about the right question. We'll be talking about all of this later. And so show you more problems. My second example is system for tracking shipment. It's not like, DHL in post that you have the package delivered to you and you can track in the app. We are talking about system between big company. The company I was working for was creating a huge exclusive equipment that was sold, for example, by Amazon. And Amazon was one of their bigger customers, and there and few others said to them, you are far behind our times. You need to use ASN, Advanced Shipping Notification. If you don't have that before the next year, we are no longer buying from you. And when someone like that is coming to you and is saying that, you are screwed. So the project was created to resolve that issue. And there was the automation test there. I joined it somewhere in the middle of the project. And the automation was not bringing the value. Why? At the point I joined, there was somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 tests. And the regression was running quite often with more than 70% failing. 1 second. Yeah. 70% tests were failing. Why? Basically, they were poorly written and not maintained. Simple change in them could take more than a day. My record was I found an if statement that have 40 conditions inside, including another if written inside, as you know, the question mark and the two dots. I have spent around a week trying to fix that test. I wanted to scrap it, but the people that were stakeholders wanted it fixed. Don't ask me why, they just wanted it, they weren't seeing the reason. But how it happened like this? Basically, there was no style guide, no rules for writing tests. There were not even the rules used for the developers weren't kept in the automation. And how that happened, you may ask? Well, basically, not simple tester until I came had any experience with the automation. They all were self-learned, spending some of their private time to learn code. Nobody give them any mentorship, nobody get them any oversee side of how they were working, which led to, the best work they could do. It wasn't good enough, but it was the best what they could do. I cannot say the bad word about what they were trying to achieve. They worked the best with the tools they got. And but how it was? Well, basically, you remember I said that the project was due to external pressure. So the customer wanted to make it as cheap as possible, and it had a very limited budget and time. So basically, there was no point thinking about the automation. You may ask, but then why did they even automate? And now I hope you are sitting, because I'm not going at the joke. They have Agile transformation a few months before the start of the project. And according to their Agile guidelines, each product, each story has to be automated. Each release has to be automatically tested. No matter that there was no question about, the quality gates, no question about how much tests should be passing or nothing. Basically, they had to have tests. So I found the unholy grail of the automation, which is automation for the automation's sake. I wish to be joking. I'm not. So what was, So what was the question here that we could ask? Basically, when I came there trying to fix that project to help them, that was before I was an expert consultant and was just regular back then, I could ask one question. Why do they even have the automation? What is the goal automation? I would very fast realize that the goal automation is to have the automation, and I would run away much sooner than I actually did. The last one is happy story. I will present it as the failure, but it is happy story. Basically, I was working for online ebook store, and we wanted to move forward. We have working automation. We have very good automation, and we wanted to have it much better. We wanted to move forward with it. Basically, it wasn't bringing us expected value, but it was bringing value as right now, but it wasn't bringing us the value to the place where we wanted to go. Why? We were at weekly deploys. Our team seen it. We are able to come to the daily deploys at that point, but our biggest blocker was testing. We weren't able to test fast enough. Why was that? Well, automation tests were written after we finished exploratory testing. It was, why? It was mostly due to the way the stories were written. Usually they were changing during the development, they were not properly mocked. Even in case of API, quite often we didn't have any contracts, so we couldn't start automation earlier. And that leads us to one important thing. The process wasn't prepared for the new delivery goal. We had to think about how to change the process to actually make the automation faster. The question that here was, what we can change in the process to make that? Of course, here is also one thing. The goal has changed. The question we asked when the automation was designed, they were good questions at the time. But with the time, our goalpost has moved. We wanted more, we want better. The question we have answered were no longer the question that were valid for us right now. We were looking for the new answer. And this is important. If you answer all the questions you have, you don't have to answer all of them, but you have to be aware that the questions and the answers which will change with the times. And here I want to sum up the problems which I seen quite often. And there are all the problems that can be answered with few questions. One, what are there are no clear expectation of the automation. So how we can have the good results if we are not knowing what we want to achieve? Of course, the tools are not first, but bad choice of the tools coming from, bad understanding of the problem. Example, Selenium as the golden hammer that resolves all automation problem. Again, connected with the expectation, no clear goals, no budget. Yeah, if you don't have money, even the open source is not free. You are still have to spend your time working on it. And even if we have the great goals, if we don't have any plans, ergo we haven't answered simple questions even, we also will fail. And no training and expertise is also the problem. And I think the biggest one, there will be a need of change in the process. And with the no will to change, nothing will gonna happen. Okay, I think we can move forward. I'm not seeing any more. Oh yeah. I agree with Martin. Selenium is not a gold hammer for all your problems, which I like it that you like it. Okay, we need to move forward with. Now we are looking for some tips. First, a lot of time with the automation is the problem with the process and the design. Technical aspect is the little rarer thing. What I mean by that, if you have broken testing process, you will have only the broken tested process that is faster. If something is broken, automation won't fix it. Automation will make it faster. Yes, the tools are allowing us to make some things that weren't possible earlier, but if we have problem with simple process that is not working, then how the more complicated process can work for us? And this is, again, I'm going to repeat, automation is just the tool. If you have the wrong thing to fix, you will get the wrong result faster. And I like the text from the Josh Wideberg. People are not buying software; they are buying solution. If someone is coming to you, he's either looking for something that will solve his problem, or he's looking for something that is gonna give him an edge. So his problem is also the fact that he doesn't have the edge, and you are giving him solution. He's not buying your software because it's Apple. Well, in case of Apple, people probably are buying it because it's Apple, but they are buying it because it will help them, or at least they believe it will help them. And we can do an allegory here. Team is not buying automation. Teams are not buying automation. Teams are buying solutions to the problem. The problem is they are not doing something fast enough. They are not getting fast enough feedback. Well, one of the examples. And this is one of the problems they're trying to solve. And automation can solve that problem. Is it the only tool that can do it? Probably not. But still, we need to understand the problem. And here is another thing we need to remember. Automation should be treated as production code. I'm not talking it should be released in production. For example, in case of unit test, you don't want to have them released with the code on the production. Probably with the automation, you can run it in the production, but not release there. And this means that you have to think about some things. You have to think about planning, documentation, architecture, goals. What problems are we trying to solve? Of course, there is one con of treating it this way. Sometimes we can go a little too far and actually think about it as the separate project that is living completely on its own. This will lead to few problems. For example, it can lead to the situation where for the automation, we need to make changes in the actual code. They will be saying no, the developers won't want that, the architects won't want that, because in their ears, it may mean that basically the automation should be serving the code, not the other way around. And it may lead to no way to change the process. And what is the worst? You may have working nice automation, but nobody knows where it is and nobody's using it. What I want also add here in the tips, don't forget about the book by the Uncle Bob, Clean Architecture. What you can say about Uncle Bob, you can say there is a lot of the things that he's doing lately that people don't like, but he's also had a lot of great things to say. In case of his book, Clean Architecture, he made a great point about testability. Sorry for that. And basically, what is the testability? From his way of thinking, testability is part of the architecture. I will allow myself to quote few things from his book about the testability. Yes, that's right. The tests are part of the system and they participate in the architecture like every other part of the system does. In some way, that participation is pretty normal. In other way, it can be pretty unique. And when he's saying that it's part of the architecture, I'm not going to discuss it with him. He's right. He had also a few more points on this point. Points on the point. From an architectural point of view, all tests are the same. Whenever they are the tiny little tests created by TDD or edge case tests by Fitness, Cucumber, Specklow, or JBHef test, they are architecturally equivalent. And this is important thing. If in case of unit test, we can say that when we cannot write unit test in the project, quite often it means that the solid principles are not followed. It also means that if we cannot use we have problem with writing the higher level test, that there is something broken in the code. Yeah. You have to think about it as one big organ. Yeah, we can think about it a kind of separate project with its own rules, but it's part of the larger issue. And so automation kind of can live on its own, but it's still part of the project. And the testability needs to be built into that main project. And what is more important, testing needs to bring value. We can discuss that testing is not bringing any value, but if the testing wouldn't be bringing any value, nobody would have done any testing. So we need to think about the automation and what value is bringing to the team. Which finally leads us, well, it's not leaving us there yet, because I want to reiterate it one more time. Never start with the choosing of the tool. Understand the problem, understand the limitation of the problem, and then look at the tools that you can choose from. So finally, we can start looking at our question. I think the great point of start is, what is the current delivery process? And what is current testing process? Is this testing process working? Because if it's not working, maybe we have first to look how we can make it work before we start thinking about the automation. Where are we in our delivery process? Maybe we can make some changes to the actual process that will give us the much more benefits than anything else. What are the changes? Again, it depends. I don't know what happened in your case. Maybe basically testing is happening too late, and maybe some statistical testing like Three Amigos or basically documentation review would bring you much more value much faster. Or maybe something else could make this process work better, more stable. And basically, we need to understand the problem with the process. And if we see the problem and we know that the automation is what can solve this problem, we're going forward. Which leads us to basically the question, what is our current bottleneck? Is it actually testing, or it looks like it's testing? Maybe the problem is that due to the issues in how the stories are developed, they planned, they actually are coming to the testing at the point that testers cannot do anything in the sprint. Or maybe there are some other issues coming there. We need to understand if the actual issue is the speed of the automation. Of course, I'm kind of making one assumption here that we are using automation for the speed. We can use it for other things. You can use automation to make better precision decision, to do some other form of testing, but usually the most common way is we are wanting to speed things up, to have faster feedback. And that kind of leads us to the goal. What is our goal of the automation? Where are we moving with our automation? What are we trying to achieve? And here is one important thing. The goal, if you don't have plan for the goal, it's good to use SMART. You know, the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. I'm not gonna go into detail of SMART. Probably your managers know very well how to use SMART. If not, there are lots of the discussions around it. This is a big problem, subject. In my opinion, SMART has its issues, but for the start, it's good because it can help us to measure something and answer one thing. Is this achievable? Are we trying something that is actually able to achieve? And I think at the start, if you have no automation, don't try how it's called, the big hairy goal. So something that is completely unachievable that we're going down the sun. This can be problematic. And since this is a big issue, let's give you a few examples. Those are completely values put out from my ears, so they are not real. Basically, but we can look at it. If you have at the production after regression bug, maybe we know the number. Maybe we can reduce the number of the bugs after each release by 20%. How? By using the automation to speed up tests so the testers can spend more time doing exploratory testing. Maybe we want to shorten the average time of the testing story by 10% in the next 3 months. There are lots of other things that we can think. And when we have the goal, then we should be looking at the actual automation, if the automation can help us achieve this goal. And another thing, do you remember what I was saying? Testing need to bring value. So the question is if the goal is actually bringing value to the team and the stakeholders. Here is one thing I need to kind of address before we move forward. Basically, we need also to look long-term and short-term. Yes, fact that something is not bringing us value right now doesn't mean that it won't be bringing value in the future. And we need to think about this balance. Automation is usually a marathon. We are not doing it for here and now. The most value brought by it will be in years, in months. And right now, usually it's cost. But here is the problem. If we will be completely concentrating at the future, we will fall because stuff that is under our feet will be the stuff that will stop us. We need to move forward. We need to think about where we're going, why we're going there, and be able to bring something here, the low-hanging fruit. Who knows, maybe you want to make big automation on the API level, but maybe for starters, it's good to use some record and play tools to bring value here and now, to show the value of the automation and then move to something better. Another thing is that the tools of record and play are much better now, so maybe it will be enough for you. And now let's look at the process because we are still connected to the process. And this is the question which I think Alexander asked. Who will write and maintain the tests? Are those the job for the testers, for developers? Are we having special law that is doing this? And especially with the maintenance, what happens when the test fail? Should the developer that is developing story first look if the code is okay? Should he fix the test? Should he basically mark it as issue to fix for the tester? Those all are the things that need to be answered because if that's not going to happen, you will have fast a lot of the tests. And this kind of is connected to what are the relation between developers and testers. Are we on the good terms? Are we playing to the same goal? Or are there animosity in your team? I think since this is for developers conference, lots of you here have friends and good relation for the developers, but it's not always the case. And I think automation is common effort. If we have to play to the same goalpost. Of course, there can be other option. You can have team that developers are doing testing, which is a great way to work also. In this case, well, yeah, that question is kind of unnecessary. And still, what can we change in the code to improve testability? Because if we have the tests that will be failing, do we want even write them? Do we want tests that will be unstable? What can we do to make them stable? Maybe we can do changes. What time is it? Oh yeah, we still have time. What can be changed to achieve better results? Maybe we can improve something in the code. Yes, we can make the test stable by adding the wait condition, by creating proper values, by giving timeouts, by giving preparation. But usually there are workaround and patches. Usually changes in the code can be much better. Or maybe the problem is not the code. Maybe the problem is infrastructure. Maybe our test server is too weak. There is a lot of tests, especially Google related, done a great material on what are the reasons of the test failures. And logs of the instability were coming from too weak equipment. I noticed it when we were doing some performance tests. Well, we were running a lot of the Selenium test for a few reasons. And if we were using a too weak Selenium grid, these were failing because the Google Chrome wasn't working good enough. So this is also the issue there. This is all that we can think about. And we are talking about the goal, we are talking about the smart and how are we measuring our progress. There are a few options. We can measure it in Jira. We can measure it in the test we are finding. We need to check against it all. And moving forward, can we make changes in delivery process? We are talking about the code. Now are we going to change the process? Can we change the process? Usually in Agile, we have retrospective where we can experiment with new things, but sometimes the team is part of a much bigger process and it may be not as easy to do. There may be some other hoops that you need to go. And unfortunately, here is the biggest issue with automation. Changes in the process take time. They are not fast, and they will mean that you have to prepare to go long way. And that kind of leads how much we can change and how fast. And of course, the most important, I'm saying it too much. One of the most important questions, are there any unit tests? If you have no unit test, why are you thinking about automation on other layer? Seriously, unit tests are much cheaper, much faster, and maybe not exactly easy to write, but I think much easier to write than stable UI test or the integration test. So if you want to automate, maybe it's much better to look into helping your developers with writing automation, with writing unit tests. I'm not gonna talk about test coverage because this is kind of touchy subject. Going line by line, it's difficult. In my opinion, if you have something above 60 or 80, you are in good position. I wouldn't put any quality gates on this value. It's worth to kind of understand what is covered, because you don't want to be doing stuff, covering stuff that is actually unimportant. The lines that are basically not doing anything. And of course, do we have budget? And I'm not talking here about money. Well, I'm also talking about money, but I'm also talking about time and people, because someone has to do it. And if at every point people that should be doing automation are completely stuck doing manual testing, then you are in the vicious loop. Why we are doing lots of manual testing? Because we don't have automation. Why we don't have automation? Because we don't have time to write the automation. Yeah, that is the problem. And this is connected to the time and people. And what is most important? Yeah, I should be stop moving this, saying this, because all these questions are so important that every time when I'm seeing them, I want to say the most important is, what are we testing? I'm not joking. I'm seeing people that wanted to use Selenium to test the desktop application. Yes, you can do something for Electron. Yes, there is Win32 driver for the Windows apps, but actually they didn't even look what tools should be used for the automation of desktop application. And this is important question. Understand, what are we testing? Okay, how are we doing with the time? Yeah, we have still some time. Now we can look into the technology that we want to use. The first question here is, what is our tech stack? If you can use the technology in the tech stack that you share with your developers, you have much more people that can help you, at least advise you on writing good quality code, than if you select a tool that is completely unfamiliar to them. For example, I've seen that on the case of the system. One of my men is currently writing a test for application of the customer, but they all have Mac and he has Windows. They basically had problem to set up it on his machine to work so he can actually use it for the automation. They went, so much budget was spent that we decided that we need to buy actually Mac for him, because all development team was using Mac. So him being with Windows, it was failed experiment. Happens. And similar is with the tech stack. If you take the technology that no one on your team knows, you are left alone with it. But that is not only thing. Sometimes you have to take technology because the others have the tool that can resolve your problem. And this is the question. Now we know our problem. We can look into the tools which are resolving. Oh, I just noticed that the Slack, the updates weren't coming. Yeah. And yeah, which tools fulfill our needs? Maybe it's Selenium. Maybe it's completely something else. Maybe it's Cypress. Maybe it's the Marble or Backpack. Who knows? Maybe you can select something there. And how test data is or will be managed. Remember, one of the projects I was doing completely failed due to test data. This is not trivial question. This is hard question And this is the question that can hurt in long run. And now we are going to how often are we running the test? The proper answer is we should be running them after each change, each deploy, each commit, but we need to go there. We are not going to happen there if you have no test today. Tomorrow there will be after each commit. The tests have to gain the trust. There's a lot of other stuff that needs to happen here. And this is kind of stupid, but it's worth mentioning. What is the acceptable length for the test run? For example, if you want in your process that the tests have to be run before the commit happens to the branch, and they have to be run locally on the developer machine, if you're going above 5 minutes, well, I have bad news for you. It will be taking too long time. People won't be running it. People won't want to run it. And when can we start automating functional story? Can we start it as long as at the moment we know what the story is about, or we are basically forced to wait until development is complete because we don't know anything about this? And now what nobody wants, documentation. First thing is what should be documented. If you are documenting anything, that's good. Well, I said there is nothing is wrong. Yeah, nothing is wrong answer. But I'm sometimes hearing that in Agile you have working software over comprehensive documentation. Let's look at the language. Over means that one part is more important than the other. It's not instead, that one part instead of the other. Comprehensive documentation means full documentation. So people are reading it as working software over instead of any documentation. No, you have to document something. If something is important, you have to document. Oh yeah, there is no documentation. Knowledge is in people. Yeah, tribal knowledge sharing. It kinda can burn. And of course, who is maintaining and writing documentation? This is also an important question because it will go out of style as everything else. And of course, since we are writing code, what are the style guides? Are we using basic style guides from the linting tools, or do we need to change something? Usually, I'm not sure in all languages, but in most stuff I have worked for, you had to change few rules for the testing. I haven't seen lots of the linters or style rules that are specific for the test automation. And what is the process for creating tests? Yeah, it doesn't have to be formal, but it's worth knowing. And do you have code review? If you don't, you should. How are you going to maintain tests? This is, again, we are talking about this, but tests will break. Tests will have to be fixed. And how are you planning today with flaky tests? On unit level, you don't have flackiness. In integration test, you can kind of avoid it, but usually on UI level, we are still dealing with it. Okay, I have shown you some questions. There is a lot more to ask. There is a lot more to ask. And one more important thing, you don't have to have answer for all of them. You don't have to have written answer for all of them, but you should think about them and at least spend a few minutes to decide if this is important to you or this is important for your project. But I think for starter, it's good enough. Let's sum up. For first thing, testability is part of the application architecture. Automation needs to follow similar rules as the normal project. There is a lot of question. This is a bigger group. We will look into one slide for the smaller, but those are the good to start. What is the goal? How are we measuring progress? Who will write and maintain tests? What are the tests in our process? How team works? How are we keeping documentation? What are our coding standards? What is the need before we start automating tests? And again, you don't need to have the answer for them all, and the answer will change in time. And if you cannot answer all of the question, even from the previous slide, if you have just to limit yourself to the very basic ones, go with what are the current bottlenecks, what is the goal of the automation, what is the state of unit test. And now we can start with questions from you. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that was informative for you. And let's start with the questions. I'm going to take a sip of the beer and we can move to the questions.